Hello, friends. Before we begin today, I've got a really quick update, especially for those of you who've been following the trial coverage here on Beach House 34. In the coming weeks, all of my trial episodes, both new and old, will be moving to a brand new podcast feed. It's called the Trial Files, and it's part of the Beach House 34 network. This means that eventually all of the trial content, like Stephen Avery and Darlie Routier coverage, plus everything else that's done in the future, will live over there. Nothing is disappearing and nothing's changing just yet, but I wanted to give you a heads up early so that you're not caught off guard. The reason for the move? These trials have kind of taken on a life of their own. And Beach House 34 was always meant to be a blend of true crime, the paranormal, the unexplained. But the trial coverage is deep, it's intense, and it deserves its own dedicated space. This change makes it easier for you to follow what you're into without having to dig through mixed episode types. What's important and what I do want to point out is that if you listen on YouTube, listen slash or watch, because there's images there, obviously, you're all set. Trial content will stay in its own playlist. There will not be any changes there. But if you're a podcast listener on Apple, Spotify, wherever else, there's like dozens of other podcast platforms that you can find Beach House 34 on. Go ahead and subscribe to the Trial Files now so you don't miss anything. I'll be reminding you in each episode moving forward, and I'll let you know before everything actually is completely moved. You can find the link to subscribe to the trial files in the show notes below. All right. Thank you. Let's get into today's episode. At the end of the last episode, the prosecutor, Attorney Kratz, had just finished his questioning of Detective Remiker, and they had all decided to, at this point, the judge had said, hey, let's take a break. And then once the jury is out of the room, the court says to the attorneys, you may be seated. And at this point, Attorney Strang, one of the defense attorneys for Stephen Avery, says, why don't we excuse the witness too, just to be on the safe side? And the court says, all right, Mr. Remiker, if you could step out in the hall for a few minutes. And then he leaves, and the judge says, Mr. Strang. And Attorney Strang then says, one thing I want to do is make sure the sound works. But there were also I thought there were three things to bring up out of the jury's presence with Detective Remiker. Turns out I've already talked to Mr. Kratz and checked one off that list. Mr. Remiker's report does not refer to finding a hair, a glove, or a fiber. And I just wanted to make sure that wasn't going anywhere, and it's not. That's a non-issue. I'm informed by the state. The two remaining issues, I don't want to make a big deal about this. It wasn't worth interrupting the direct, but I think when I explain them, Your Honor will understand why we need to do a little bit of correcting here, for want of a better word. We have Detective Remiker wrote reports, fairly lengthy reports. And on November 4th, 2005, we have his report of his meeting with Mr. Avery. And he recounts Mr. Avery as stating then that the female subject has been on the property numerous times. Now, what we heard today was Steve said that she had been in the residence. Oh, yeah. I remember referring to that in the last episode. That gets to be, the witness wouldn't have known that necessarily, but that gets to be a fairly significant difference. And I expect he did not mean to alter or deviate from his report. If he did, and that's an altogether different statement than the one disclosed to us. Again, I'm assuming it's what he meant was Mr. Avery said she had been on the property, but the courts heard the evidence under understands the importance of the distinction of statements. And then we have his report on the November 6th search where he's asked to retrieve the guns and the vacuum cleaner. And the report, in fact, says, this is page 15 of the 24-page Manitowoc County report. Report says that they collected the entire vacuum cleaner. Today, what he says is, I don't remember if it's a vacuum cleaner or a carpet cleaner or carpet shampooer. I don't remember if it's a shampooer or cleaner, but he's now offering the possibility that this wasn't a normal vacuum cleaner, but was a carpet cleaner. And I'm assuming in the sense of suggesting something wet. The potential importance of that is obvious. And, our belief is that this was just a vacuum cleaner. And I thought maybe we ought to take those 2 points up out of the jury's presence and try to streamline the cross and not create any more problems than we have to. As I say, the third point I've already cleared up with Mr. Kratz. The court then says, Mr. Kratz. Attorney Kratz then says, well, Judge, if there are any inconsistencies, obviously Mr. Strang can go into them, certainly with the vacuum cleaner issue. Regarding the defendant's statement, if Mr. Strang wanted to take a minute or two with Mr. Remiker outside the presence of the jury, I don't have any problem with that. That may be the easiest way to do that. Attorney Strang says, yeah. And then Kratz says, so that there's no question. Attorney Strang says, that's a good suggestion. Or if it's a non-issue, then we don't have to belabor it. And the court says, all right, why don't we bring Attorney Strang says, or I can just go to the witness room, however you want to. And the court says, oh. Attorney Strang says, do it, Your Honor. Attorney Kratz says, he's got some AV issue as well, Judge, that we thought. Court says, oh, we could take a few minutes here. So, and the court says, all right. And then wherein Attorney Strang then speaks to Detective Remiker. And Attorney Strang says, Your Honor, this is going to wind up taking a few more minutes. Sorry about that. I didn't expect the issue. The court says, we'll take about another 5 minutes and then come back. So around 3:10 p.m., recess had started at 2:21 p.m. The court reconvenes. The jurors are still not present. And the court says, at this time, we are on the record outside the presence of the jury. Mr. Strang. Attorney Strang says, thank you, Your Honor. We've addressed a number of issues here in the break, and I appreciate the court's consideration. The witness, Detective Remiker, testified on direct examination by the state to a statement of the defendant that was not disclosed in discovery materials to the defense, so created a problem of noncompliance with Section 971.231B. However, the state, meaning the prosecution team, also did not have that statement. For whatever reason, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department did not share with the prosecution this statement or the report document. We now have been able to obtain copies of that report. Both sides have it. Taking the whole of Detective Remiker's testimony in context, the defense is not moving for a mistrial. We discussed that with Mr. Avery. I believe he understands why we're not seeking a mistrial and accepts that decision. Collaboratively with the prosecutors, we have agreed on a curative measure that we think will suffice here in these circumstances, and of course, that handles today's issue. If an issue of an undisclosed statement of the defendant elicited by the state should arise again, we, of course, may be in a position of seeking other relief. But I think we've addressed today's issue with the time that we've had, and I appreciate it. And the court says, anything else from the state? Attorney Kratz says, no, Judge, just that the inconsistency in Mr. Remiker's testimony compared to the reports that the defense did have, as Mr. Strang indicates, is minimal, especially as related to Mr. Remiker's statement as a whole. The curative measure that we've jointly come up with is very acceptable to the state, and we are prepared to have Mr. Strang commence his cross-examination. And the court says, all right, before we bring the jury in, let me ask that the Elmo light be turned off. I would imagine it's stronger to the jurors sitting next to it than it is here, and it's got some glare. Okay, so if you didn't listen to this whole thing, I don't blame you. Here is kind of like the TLDR of what just happened. So before the jury comes back in, there was kind of this beside behind the scenes huddle kind of between the judge, the defense, and the prosecution. Um, Attorney Strang raised two issues that he had with Detective Remiker's testimony. Things that weren't really worth interrupting in the moment, but still needed to kind of be cleaned up. First of all, Remiker's report from November 4th, 2005 said that Stephen Avery told him that Teresa had been on the property, quote unquote, numerous times. But during his testimony, Remiker added something new. He said that Avery said that she had been inside the residence. That's a whole different statement. And that version hadn't been disclosed to the defense. Secondly, there was confusion about what kind of cleaning device had been collected from Avery's property on November 6th. The report said vacuum cleaner, but in court, Remiker started backtracking, saying maybe it was a carpet cleaner or a shampooer, maybe something wet. You can see how that kind of shift matters in a forensic context. Strang said he wasn't making a big deal out of it, but, wanted to clear things up without throwing more chaos into the cross-examination. And Kratz agreed and suggested that they just talk to Remiker outside the jury's presence to get clarity, which they did. Turns out, to the surprise testimony about Avery's statement wasn't even shared with the prosecution either. It came from a Manitowoc County Sheriff's report that somehow never made it to either legal team until that day. So, yeah, another case of information kind of slipping through the cracks. Strang made it clear they weren't asking for a mistrial this time, but noted that they might take stronger action if something like this happened again. And both sides agreed on a measure to address it, basically kind of like this legal Band-Aid. And then they got ready to bring the jury back in, and they moved on with the cross-examination. All right, we'll bring in the jurors at this time, and Mr. Remiker can be brought back into the courtroom as well. So the jury returns then at 3:15. The court says you may be seated, and then tells Mr. Strang that he may commence his cross-examination of the witness. And then Mr. Strang begins. Detective Remiker, when you explained to counsel at the prosecution table on direct examination that Lieutenant James Link is your boss or your supervisor, I believe is the term you used. He is, first of all. I understood you correctly? Yes. All right. And what you mean by that is that he's one of the people who reviews your work performance? Yes. Does an annual review, that type of thing? Annual evaluation? Evaluation? Sure. Has some input on whether you get a salary increase and how much? I don't know about that. You know one way or the other? No. Okay. But, he's your supervisor. He's the one who controls your assignments or passes out assignments to you? Correct. You work with him on the same shift? Yes. The meeting on the evening of November 3rd, after you were paged, you first learned about the missing person report from Calumet County? Yes. You get paged? You come in? Correct. Sometime in the evening? Yes. That you told us that investigator John Dietering from Calumet County Sheriff's Department was at that meeting? Yes. As was Lieutenant Link? Yes. Detective Dennis Jacobs from your department, or no? Yes. He was there. Obviously, you were there. Anyone else you recall being present at that November 3rd, the Thursday night meeting? At one point, we got with Sergeant Colburn also. That initial meeting, Sergeant Colburn wasn't there. Okay. But Colburn comes back to the sheriff's office at some point, and you folks touch base with him as well? Yes. The Detective Dennis Jacobs is someone who's a relatively new name here. Colleague of yours? Yes. Was he in the detectives unit or detective bureau before you joined in May 2003? Yes. You also worked same shift with him? Yes. You you two frequently worked together? Yes. And that evening then, you joined investigator Dietering in going out to the zipperers? Correct. And what had caused me to chuckle in reading the report of yours, which I thought it might have been the understatement of the year, you you found that initially George Zipperer was not real cooperative. It took them a while to answer the door and not real cooperative. Yeah, I mean that's the way you described it, is it not, in your report? Uncooperative? I think your I think your exact words were initially George was not real cooperative. That's accurate. Does this look like your report from November 3rd? Yes. You can look at whatever you want to help refresh your recollection, but I highlighted that. That's what it says. George was not real cooperative. That's true, isn't it? Initially? Yes. Took 15 or 20 minutes even to answer the door with sheriff deputies outside? Yes. Wouldn't allow the police to enter the house even then? Initially, no. You had to do it out sort of a lengthy interview with his wife, Joellen, through a window before anybody would let you in the house? Yes. George was belligerent. I would say a good word to use probably would be a little abrasive. A little abrasive. Some hostility. I am sure he wasn't real happy to have law enforcement on his property at that time. What time was it? I would say about between 9 and 10, possibly. All right. This abrasive attitude and not real happy to have law enforcement on his property continued even after you told him that a young woman was missing. He calmed down as we talked to him a little bit further. But at one point, he told you that he wanted Teresa Halbach arrested. I don't know if he said that. Well, Attorney Kratz then says, I'll just interpose a relevance objection, Judge. The court says, Mr. Strang. Attorney Strang says, this was the other person whom they knew or they had been told that Teresa had appointments with. And the cooperation or lack of cooperation, I think, goes to whether these people merited further investigation, Your Honor. The court says, I'll allow the question. Attorney Strang then continues. Did this statement about wanting her arrested is not in your report. So I'm getting that from Detective Dietering. You in any event don't necessarily remember that comment of George Zipperer. I don't recall George Zipperer saying that he wanted Teresa Halbach arrested. You do not recall that, or you do? No. I'm sorry. Okay. Do you recall Mr. Zipperer denying that he had contacted Auto Trader? Yes, I believe so. Although you learned that it was his car or a family member's car that she had come to photograph. I believe it was his son, Jason's vehicle. Jason denied that he had called to have his car photographed initially. Too? I believe so, yes. That was a false denial. Is that a question or a statement? It's a question. Okay. No, I don't recall that. Well, did you talk to Joellen Zipperer? Yes. And she said, yes, of course, the young woman was out here to photograph a car. Correct. My son Jason owns the car. Yes. And the best that Joellen Zipperer could do is say that Miss Halbach, she didn't have a name, Miss Halbach, right? Just the female photographer. Yes. That the female photographer may have been on the property sometime between noon and 1500 hours. No precise time could be obtained from Joellen? Correct. 1500 hours is 3 p.m. 3 p.m. Now, the next morning, you and Lieutenant Link go back out to see Mr. Avery again. Again? That was the first time we seen Steve Avery. I understand, but, I'm sorry, Sergeant Colburn had testified that he saw Mr. Avery the night of the 3rd? Yes. So he had gone there? That's why you went to the Zipperers? Yes. The night of the 3rd? Correct. You go out the 4th, and that's the first time you see Stephen Avery yourself? Yes. With Lieutenant Link? Yes. Mr. Avery, by comparison, was very cooperative? Yes. You had this conversation with him in which he said, she was here a few minutes, some talk. Hi, how are you doing? I paid her, she left. Correct. He also told you that she'd been on the property several times before? Yes. Photographing vehicles? Yes. Consented to the search of his house? Correct. And that's all that that's the sum, that's what happens November 4th, as I understand it. Yes. With you? Yes. Now, November 5th, Saturday, you may have said this and I didn't hear it. I apologize. But my recollection is you get out, you actually arrive at the Avery property right about 11 in the morning. Yes. Give or take a minute. Correct. Something like that. Had you met between the short discussion with Mr. Avery on the 4th and 11 o'clock on the 5th, had you met with Detective Jacobs, Dennis Jacobs, at any time there? Between those two? Not on Saturday the 5th until he came out there. We may have been working on the 4th that Friday. He may have been working that same day. On shift together, but yes. Okay, now I'm going to play you part of a taped conversation from November 5th. It's Exhibit 126, and it's here. And I think he's actually you were the one who physically gave us these CD-ROMs back in the summer? Yes, okay. I'm going to play part of this and ask you if you recognize the voices so I may stop it. Definitely. Okay. The CD is then played and it goes as follows. 10-4, and then it's unintelligible. 405. Go ahead. I have warrant in hand. Body only, correct? And then it's unintelligible. And then Attorney Strang says, now do you recognize the voices here? Yes. 405 is Deputy Pete O'Connor, correct? Okay. And the dispatcher, is this Katie? Correct. Okay. I only know that because she says her name at some points, but you recognize it as Katie? Yes. All right. Deputy O'Connor is talking about a body warrant in hand. That's accurate. We just heard him say that. Correct. A body warrant is something where you have a warrant to pick somebody up and they aren't going to be released on bail until they physically see a judge. Correct. That's what a body warrant means. A body only warrant means you take that person in custody. And a judge sets bail, if at all? Correct. Okay. So typically that might be something like a missed court appearance where there's what's called a bench warrant. That could very well be. Could be other reasons. And so what's happening here is Deputy O'Connor is out at the intersection of Highway 147, Avery Road, somewhere near there. He is, yes. Yeah. I mean, that's where you saw him or later? Correct. Okay. And in fact, you had told him to stop people coming in and out? Correct. So that's what he's doing. And he's running checks on people and he comes up with a body only warrant. I believe so. Yes. Okay. That's what it sounds like is going on here. Yes. All right. I was just going to continue playing a little more. And then he continues playing this CD. 409 dispatch, 409. I'm now 76 to 147 Avery Road. Pick up that party. Attorney Strang then says, now, I'm now 76, which is a 10 code. Uh-huh. Yes. 1076. En route. En route to Avery Road to pick up the party with the body warrant. Body only warrant. I believe he says to pick up the party. Correct. Yes. And were you on the radio at about this time? It's after 11 p.m.? Mm-hmm. Yeah. 11 a.m. A lot of things going on at that time. Okay. No, I understand. I'm not asking if you remember, but yes, this is generally familiar to you. That's the first time I've heard that. Okay. And then he continues playing the CD. 10-4. 10-3-23 Manitowoc, you can put me 10-23. 10-4. 487-496. Go ahead. When you get a chance, give me a 21 on that 4224. And then it's unintelligible. 278 dispatch code. Go ahead. You're going to need to get a hold of the crime lab for their evidence response team to start responding at this location. And then Attorney Strang continues. Okay. Now that's you, right? Absolutely. Okay. You're 278. 278. There's this reference to being in code. Yes. Which means that you're on a non-publicly monitored frequency for the most part. Yes. Okay. And what you're saying here is you're telling the dispatcher she'll need to get a hold of the crime lab evidence response team to start responding to this location? Yes. Okay. This, by the way, is a radio tape, correct? Correct. We're listening to radio transmissions here? Correct. And then he continues playing the CD. 10-4, crime lab out of Madison, Milwaukee, where? And then it's unintelligible. Madison response team. 278, I'm in code. Anything you need other than a portable for shutter? And not that I can think of right now, Dennis. Okay, that's Detective Dennis Jacobs calling in. Yes. And you're responding to him? He's asking me if I need anything besides a portable radio for Deputy Inspector Shutter, and I say right now I can't think of anything. Yeah, exactly. The portable for Shutter is a portable radio? Correct. And Deputy Inspector. Okay. And then he continues playing the CD. Okay. Other than the car, do we have anything else? Not yet. Okay. Is he in custody? Negative. Nothing yet. Okay. I'll gather my stuff and head out. And then the tape is stopped and he says, okay, now that's you and Jacobs going back and forth again, right? Yes. And he asks you, okay, other than the car, do we have anything else? And you tell him, not yet. Nothing yet. He's referring to the Toyota is what he means by the car. I'm assuming, yes. That's how you understood him? Yes. And then he says, okay, is he in custody? Right? That's what he says. And you say negative. Nothing yet? Yes. You're not asking who is in custody? Did you know who he meant by he? I'm assuming he meant, based on listening to that conversation, it sounds to me like he's indicating Steve Avery. Yes. Okay. And this is shortly after you've arrived on Saturday, November 5th. I don't know what time that radio transmission is. Okay. But this is when you're first telling the dispatcher that she's going to need to call the crime lab. Yeah, crime lab was probably contacted about 11:30, somewhere around there. Yes. Right. And I'll tell you, I think that's actually very close to the timestamp. Yes, on this, but somewhere in the ballpark. Okay. Anyway, right? That makes sense. Because we do hear you saying you're going to need to contact the crime lab. Correct. That would be about 11:30. Okay. Now, track 4 on the same exhibit 126. And then he continues to play this CD. Good morning, Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Katie speaking. Katie, just rolled into the parking lot. Can you tell me? And then he ends it. Now, this is not a radio call. Is that right? Sounds like an incoming call into dispatch. The phone ringing sound at the beginning? Yes. Okay. And do you recognize the voice of the man who says he just rolled into the parking lot? Yes, that's Detective Jacobs. Okay, I'm going to back it up just a little bit here. And Attorney Kratz then says, Judge, once again, I'm going to interpose a hearsay objection. I know I've made the same objection before with a similar call, but I'm interposing that again at this time. And then Attorney Strang says, and the jury should understand I'm not offering this for the truth, just that it was said. Attorney Kratz then says, then it has no relevance, Judge. And the court says, I'm going to overrule the objection. And then the CD is continued to be played. Good morning, Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Katie speaking. Katie, just rolled into the parking lot. Can you tell me, do we have a body or anything yet? I don't believe so. Do we have Stephen Avery in custody, though? I have no idea. Oh, I've heard them say, pick up that party. Oh no. Pete is sitting up there waiting and stopping people from going in and that. He found somebody with a body-only warrant for, our department. Okay, all right. Do we have, and this is unintelligible. Yeah, your best bet is to talk to, nothing has come through. We have the vehicle, that I know. All right, thank you. But what more, I don't know. All right, bye. Bye. He's talking about Stephen Avery. He's asking, that's what he says, asking if Stephen Avery's in custody. This is when he's rolling into the parking lot before he's called you on the call we listened to first. That's what the call says. I can't testify to what he said. The day before, you're thinking Calumet County is barking up the wrong tree. And the next day, a car has been found, and you two are talking about, is he in custody yet? Those questions are being asked of me. Yeah. Okay. Now, I believe my responses were negative. Negative. No. I understand. I can tell by the tone of my voice, it even sounds like it's a silly question. Okay. And indeed, I mean, when you got out to the Avery property on November 5th, there were customers there. Yes. People, customers in the pit or the salvage yard part of the business. Correct. Earl Avery was there. Yes. This was a business that was open. Yes. Or had been until, law enforcement officers closed off the property. Correct. You knew that a number of Avery family members lived on this roughly 40-acre parcel. And look, you may not have known that then. I can't say I did. But you learned during the course of the next several days that there were a number of family members who lived on this property. I asked Earl when I talked to him down there who all lived there and where and what house. Right, and I'm not worried now so much about November 5th, but in the next several days, you came to learn that Chuck Avery lived in a trailer on the property. Yes. Alan and Dolores lived on the property. Yes. Stephen Avery's sister, Barb Janda, about whom you testified she lived on the property. Correct. Her 4 sons, or at least 3 of them at the time. I don't know about the sons. Okay. I can't testify to that. All right. But there were a number of people other than Steve Avery living on the property. Correct. And your understanding was that Miss Hallbach had been there sometime on a Monday, October 31st. Yes. Or had an appointment there. Yes. Monday would have been a business day on the Avery salvage property. I have no idea. Okay. But I mean, in general, Monday's a commercial day. It was Halloween. I don't know if they close for Halloween. I don't know. Okay. It's a business property in any event. Yes. Little later in the morning of the 5th, you're involved in this conversation that you described about that ultimately results in the decision to turn the investigation over to the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. I was involved in some discussions. Yes. Was this still a missing persons investigation, notwithstanding the comment about whether we have a body yet? I wouldn't consider it a missing person, although looking at that vehicle and the fact that it was concealed, the license plates removed, I was very suspicious at that time. I obviously thought we had something more. And indeed, arrangements were made at part of that conversation to appoint a special prosecutor. Yes. In a missing persons investigation, one wouldn't ordinarily expect a prosecutor for a criminal case if somebody's just gone away for a few days and then shows up later? I think everybody's thought at that time, based on the events that had transpired and the fact that we found that vehicle at that location in that condition, I think everybody thought that we had a criminal investigation. If there was a criminal investigation, yes, there would be no need for a prosecutor. Yes. And there would be a need for search warrants. Yes. Which are used in criminal investigations. Yes. You were part of the group that went to obtain the initial search warrant for the Avery property. Yes. You obtained that about 3:10 in the afternoon. Yes. You know that a search warrant is something that's obtained in part by a sworn statement or affidavit, typically of a law enforcement officer. Yes. You were present when the application for that search warrant was sworn out. Yes. By Mr. Wiegert. Yes. The search warrant application declared, and you heard this under oath, that you folks expected to find evidence of a homicide. Yes. Among other potential offenses. Correct. At the time that search warrant was sworn out before Judge Fox, what you had recovered was the Toyota? Yes. Your testimony is that no one had even opened a door to the Toyota. I know the officers there did not open a door. Correct. As far as you know, the doors had not been opened. Correct. All right. You had seen, or you and another officer had seen, a white piece of paper with something like the word or the name Teresa on it. I think there was a digital camera photo card. Later that evening then, you and others acted on the search warrant that had been obtained at 3:10. Yes. 2.5 hours in Mr. Avery's house, roughly give or take 7:30 to 10 or thereabout. 7:30 to 10:05. Correct. Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that to be a trick question. You saw bedding and pillowcases eventually seized, bagged, and removed from Mr. Avery's house? Yes. You saw no blood at all on that bedding or those pillowcases? I didn't observe any at the time we took it. No. Mr. Link, Lieutenant Link, and others searched the bathroom. Myself, Sergeant Colburn, searched the bathroom after we were done with the bedroom. Lieutenant Link may have done some searches in the bathroom initially, too. Was it you who found in the living room at the computer desk area that the 2 documents with Teresa Halbach's cell phone number on them? Yes. I got Exhibit 198 and 194 for you. 198 is the little notebook? Yes. Where did you find that? There is a desk in the living room of the trailer, and that was on top of the desk. I think it was actually closed, and I opened it up and paged through it and seen it. But just sitting on top of the desk, much as it is now, I believe so, yes. Okay. I think it was like that initially. With the cover, yes, folded, all right. And this sign, that's a for sale sign with writing on the back, is, yes, that right? Correct. Where'd you find the for sale sign? That was also on the desk. As I'm facing the desk in the living room, the right side of the fence, right side of the desk. It was pushed into a slot, or amongst other papers, pushed into an upper portion of the desk area. I pulled it out. It was sort of a mail slot, yes, kind of thing. That's accurate. With a number of other papers, yes, in there. So you pulled all of them out. Yes. Looked at them. Mm-hmm. And decided that since this had Miss Halbach's cell phone number, it may be worth taking. Correct. Both of those things, I suppose, could have been relatively easily burned in a burn barrel, for example. I suppose. I mean, if somebody was looking to hide them or get rid of them, there were better places than lying out on top of the desk or in the mail slot in the desk. I guess, yes. The actual page with an Exhibit 198 with Miss Halbach's telephone number is written in 2 different colors of ink. I believe so, yes. Green and blue or black, I believe, is the phone number. Or I'm sorry, the words. Whatever. We'll get back to it. Yes, a phone number is in a green, and back to patio doors. The green looks to you, to your eye, like a fine point felt sort of, or rollerball kind of ink. Yes. And the black looks like an ordinary ballpoint pen. I would say that's accurate. No way to know then whether there's any connection between the two different things and the two different inks written on the same page. I'm just going to interrupt here. Sorry about that. And let you know that I don't know if this is a typo in the actual transcript or if the defense just spoke this wrong. But this exhibit number is not 198, it's 148. Because if you watch along on YouTube, you know that I add all of these exhibit numbers and all of the exhibits that I have access to on the video to the podcast. And I thought, I have seen this before. I've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen it. And sure enough, it's actually exhibit 148, not 198. So if you're looking at it, especially if you're on YouTube or if you're keeping track of this through your podcast, this is actually exhibit 148 that has this green and then black text on this notebook page within this little small notebook pad. Anyway, let's get back to it. I have no idea. The it's obvious the page isn't torn out, no tape on the page kind of thing. It looks like it got wet at one time and maybe dried. But it's not torn out of the no. And there's no, as I say, no tape or other anything to hang it up. No. The search in the garage on November 6th, I think that's the first time you actually searched the garage rather than simply sweeping it to look for Miss Hallbach. Correct. You folks found some empty shell casings for looked like 22 caliber rounds. Yes. 10 of these, something like that. I think 11. 11? I believe so. On the floor? Yes. Where there are shell casings, there may be bullets. We found shell casings. Were you looking for bullets? We were looking for everything. Found no bullets in the search on November 6th of the garage? Correct. Found no bullets any other time in Stephen Avery's garage anytime in November of 2005? Correct. It was March 2nd, 2006, and you were present when bullets or bullet fragments were found in that garage? On March 2nd, yes. I'm sorry. Bullet fragment. What did I say March 6th? I believe so. Sorry, March 2nd, 2006? Correct. One bullet fragment? Yes. I think same name, same date, November 6th, back to November, is when you go into the Jonda trailer and you get the answering machine? Yes. Could you tell, and I don't know, I haven't seen the machine, but could you tell whether it appeared that those messages had been listened to before you listened to them? My indication, if that was the case, is that the number would have been blinking, and I don't remember if it was or not. I don't know. And I'm not sure I understood what you just said. If they had been listened to, the number would be blinking. I'm making a comparison to my answering machine, which is a digital answering machine. If there's a message on there that needs to be listened to, it would probably blink a number. And once you listen to it, the number stays on. I don't remember if it was blinking or if it was on. So you're not able to say whether anyone had reviewed message number 6? I don't know that. What you do know is that the digital display suggested there were 12 messages. Yes. You listened to all 12 of them. Yes. Number 6 was the one that you thought had anything to do with anything. Correct. Again, March 1st and 2nd, as I move forward there, you were physically present both days? Yes. Did you see Lieutenant Link there on site at the Averys on either day? In March? Yes, March 1st and March 2nd. Yeah, he was there. He was there both days. I believe so. Yes. So I was curious. Of course I was, because, I do these things, which takes a lot of time on my end, my own fault. But I wanted to know what actually Lieutenant Link and Sergeant Colburn had actually said about these March dates in their testimony, because they've already testified, right? Lieutenant Link's testimony shows that he was present on the Avery property in March, specifically March 1st and March 2nd of 2006. So what's being testified to here, how Remiker remembers that Link was there both days, he is correct. Here are the direct quotes from Link's testimony. He says, on March 1st, the day we got out there, my assignment was to videotape prior to the search of Stephen Avery's residence and after the completion of the search. As I was there, as we were standing by, as other people were doing their search, I was asked numerous times about certain pieces of equipment, or what they should do, or how they should collect that, or if I had this or if I had that. And I would then just provide them with whatever they needed. And then he was asked, you were inside of Mr. Avery's trailer then on the 1st and 2nd of March? And he says, I believe, yes, both days, yes. Then he says, on the 1st, I wasn't in the garage. I may have been near the garage to give them supplies. On the 2nd, I was then asked if I could come into the garage and help them. He was asked, did you assist other law enforcement officers in a thorough search of Mr. Avery's garage on March 2nd? And he says, yes. And then he also continued in this testimony where he says, well, we found some additional shell casings. We were searching on our hands and knees. At one point, I remember DCI agent Kevin Heimerl located what looked to be a bullet fragment near the air compressor, kind of in the back left corner of the garage. And then as far as Sergeant Colburn's testimony goes, it does confirm that he too was present on the Avery property, specifically March 1st and 2nd, and then was asked, you came back to Mr. Avery's 4 months later, not quite 4 months later? And he says, yes, March 1st and 2nd of 2006. That's correct, sir. Much smaller search this time, wasn't it? He says, yes, sir. I believe it was just the garage. And then he was asked, the entire rest of the property was not closed off to the public? He said, no, sir, it was not. And then asked, the rest of the property was not closed off to the Avery family? And he says, I believe it was not. And then he's asked, a search was going on in the garage. He says, that's correct. You came back? Yes, sir. Did you participate in that search? No, sir, I did not. Why were you back? I came back to see if they needed any food assistance with supplies, see if I could help out. Both days? He's like, I believe I was there both days. I'm not sure. And then during redirect, Colburn also stated was asked on March 1st or 2nd, did he ever enter any building on the Avery property? And he said, no, he did not. He said he never entered the trailer or especially the garage. So there's that. Let's continue. Sergeant Colburn? I don't believe Sergeant Colburn was out there. If he was, it may have been for some security away from the garage area, the residence. You just don't know? I don't know. I don't know if you're able to help with this again. I'll try. If you can't, you can't. Okay? 3302 Xander Road, Manitowoc County address? Any idea? Don't know. Don't know of any connection between 3302 Xander Road and Teresa Hallbach? I do not know that. Okay, that's all I've got. Thanks. The court then says, Mr. Kratz, any redirect? Attorney Kratz says, yes, Judge, but I do have one issue outside the presence of the jury that I must raise. Oh my God. Of course he does. He does every single time. And then the court says, very well, we'll excuse the jury here. And at this point, the jurors are out and the court says, Mr. Kratz, Attorney Kratz says, "Thank you, Judge. The record should reflect that this witness has been asked and has, in fact, left the courtroom." Mr. Strang, now, for at least the second time and the first time with this witness, has been allowed to introduce the subject of investigative bias. That is, been allowed with this witness to suggest that there was a better reason for the law enforcement officials to be looking at Mr. Zipperer rather than that of Mr. Avery. Apparently, Mr. Strang's suggestion to this witness was because Mr. Avery was seemingly more that the officers still focused on Mr. Avery. As this court knows, the state asked the court to reject the notion of institutional bias. And I think with specific witnesses, that has been addressed. But this investigative bias, or the distinction that Mr. Strang now makes, is something that the state feels unable to meet, feels unable to address. I suspect that this witness, if asked and if allowed to testify truthfully, would give good reasons why Mr. Avery was a suspect. As between Mr. Zipperer and Mr. Avery, only one of those two people was sent to prison for a violent felony offense, pointing a firearm at a woman. That seems relevant, Judge. And with Mr. Strang and his suggestion now that there was seemingly no reason to look at Mr. Avery compared to Mr. Zipperer, I want to ask this witness that question. I want to be able, with Mr. Strang having opened that door, to be able to allow Mr. Remiker, on behalf of his department, to suggest why they might be asking, is Mr. Avery in custody, or why Mr. Avery was being interviewed or investigated. I think that's going to be the answer. If we ask the court if I'm allowed to ask that question, we certainly wouldn't have done it. And I've abided by the court's pretrial ruling regarding the other acts of evidence. But on that specific count, that is, that specific felony offense for which we know included imprisonment for Mr. Avery, that now becomes relevant. And the state should be allowed at this time to inquire in a limited fashion as to what these detectives knew of Mr. Avery's violent history. The court then says, Mr. Strang. Attorney Strang says, "Thank you, Your Honor." And I appreciate Mr. Kratz raising this out of the jury's presence. I still don't think there's any linkage at all here in this trial between the 1985 felony conviction involving different people and different conduct, or a different victim, if you will, and different conduct altogether. And this investigation, particularly where the visit to the Zipperers and the evidence about the Zipperers is limited to November 3rd. And we have both Detective Remiker and Lieutenant Link going out of their way on direct examination to testify that, boy, on November 4th, we either thought Calumet County was barking up the wrong tree, or we thought Mr. Avery had nothing to do with it. So I don't think I've opened any back door to bringing in a 22-year-old felony conviction. I just don't think any door to that has been opened at all. I don't anticipate there'll be further in evidence about the Zipperers, but I don't know that it even matters. The court says, Mr. Kratz. Attorney Kratz says, "Well, Judge, I can't, and with apologies to the court in oversimplifying this term, I can't see how else to address the concept of poor Stephen Avery. Why would you be looking at poor Stephen Avery to have committed this offense? There's a very, very good reasons why law enforcement, because of what they knew about his prior violent felony history. There may be other reasons, Judge, and perhaps will shed an offer of proof for me to do that outside of the presence of the jury, but we should at least be allowed to inquire." And the court says, "Well, maybe I'm missing something here, but seems to me, as I understood the testimony of this witness, it may be that Mr. Jacobs thought for some reason that the state should be focusing on Mr. Avery. But as I understood Detective Remiker's testimony, at least at the time, he was not. He attempted to distance himself from any suggestion that at the time of the conversation that was from which we heard the audio today, that Mr. Remiker had focused on Stephen Avery." Attorney Kratz says, "I'm heartened that the court may not have bought into Mr. Strang's cross-examination. I'm not sure that the jury's in the same position, though. They certainly may have, Judge. When Mr. Strang was allowed on cross-examination to continue to talk about how uncooperative Mr. Zipperer was, and why would you then be going back to talk to Mr. Avery? And the court says, well, on redirect, you can heighten that if you wish. But that was my understanding. I don't remember the exact quotes that Mr. Remiker gave, but at this point, this witness didn't support the premise that at least he, as a member of the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department, was locked in on Stephen Avery. If there's nothing else, we'll bring the jurors back in and bring the witness back in for redirect. Attorney Kratz says, I assume the court's denying my request then to go into those other matters? And the court says, yes, I am. Attorney Kratz says, what they knew about his history? The court says, yes. Attorney Kratz says, all right. And then Attorney Strang says, maybe we could get a sense of the timing of the rest of the day. The court says, Mr. Kratz, how much time do you think you'll be doing your redirect? Attorney Kratz says, can't be more than 10 minutes, Judge. The court says, and who's the next witness? Attorney Kratz says, Deputy Kucharski, who has lots of photos and evidence that's going to be introduced. I don't know if the court wants to I don't know if there's going to be any recross, but the court says, well, we'll see what time we have left after Mr. Remiker, but I don't know that it will pay to start another witness by that time. Attorney Kratz says, that's fine. Thank you, Judge. The jurors are now back into the courtroom at 4:04 p.m., and the court says, you may be seated. Mr. Kratz, does the state have any redirect? And Attorney Kratz says, yes, Judge, and the redirect is begun. Detective Remiker, on the evening of the 4th of November and the morning hours of the 5th of November, that is prior to the time that we heard those calls from Detective Jacobs, was your department informed that Stephen Avery was, if not the last, one of the last people to see Teresa Halbach alive? Yes. If this would have been your investigation at that particular moment, would Stephen Avery have been a person of interest in your investigation? Absolutely. And so when Detective Jacobs asks questions about Stephen Avery, and is he in custody, were you surprised with Detective Jacobs' request or comments? Not really. I mean, Steve was a person that could have been a suspect. He saw her, was the last person to see her. Now, when we hear Detective Jacobs' call, and I know that's not your call, and it's hard to ask you, really unfair to ask you to speak for another person, but what I heard was that two different things were going on. And correct me if I'm wrong. First was that Teresa's car was found on the Avery property. Is that right? That's what's said, yes. What's going on also at almost the identical time is dispatch is announcing that some party was taken into custody. Is that right? Yes. Now, those two things, as it so happens, are unrelated. Is that right? Correct. Now, unless Detective Jacobs would have asked if those two events were related or not, is there any way he would have known if they were unrelated? He wouldn't have known that. Based on the radio traffic, it sounds like somebody was taken into custody. Somebody was taken into custody. And Dennis Jacobs asked if that was Steve Avery. That's what's said, yes. Mr. Strang asked you about Mr. Zipperer and asked about Mr. Avery, and that both of those individuals were persons of interest to you. That's fair, isn't it? Definitely. On the 4th, that is the night before Teresa's vehicle is found, was one person, that is Mr. Zipperer, compared to Mr. Avery, was one person given more attention than the other person? I would say it was fairly equal at that point. Well, let me just ask, by the time frame, who did you guys spend more time with, Mr. Avery or Mr. Zipperer? I spent a lot more time with Mr. Zipperer and Joellen. Are you familiar with Sergeant Colburn's contact with Mr. Avery earlier? That'd be on the 3rd? Yes. And then your contacts on the 4th with Mr. Avery. Is that right? Correct. As between the two, are you able to ascertain which was given more of your time or attention? We were at the Zipperer property longer than I was at the Avery property on Friday. I think the Avery property was a total of 15 minutes total. I know for a fact we were at the Zipperer property longer than that, speaking with George, speaking with Joellen, speaking with Jason. Okay. What was your goal on the 4th? What was your investigative goal that night? That night? The day of I'm sorry, the 4th during morning hours? Yeah. Day of and evening of the 4th? My goal was to find Teresa Hallbach or to come up with some answers as to where she was. And obviously, we made contact with Steve, and Steve was cooperative. And at that point, I had no reason to believe that Steve was a suspect based on what we had at the time. My goal entirely from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday was to find Teresa. Bottom line. Thank you, Detective. Attorney Kratz says that's all I have, Judge. Attorney Strang says nothing more. Thanks. The court says, all right, the witness is excused. All right. So since we're done with Remiker's testimony, you know what that means. We head on over to the Zellner Files, which tells us exactly the information that Stephen's post-conviction attorney found and what she filed. And here's what we find out. Detective Remiker's name does come up in especially the motion for post-conviction relief. His role pretty much shows up primarily over two big issues. The investigation of Teresa Hallbach's last known movements, specifically the Janda trailer voicemail discovery, when he listened to those voicemails, and how police then constructed that crucial timeline. According to Zellner's motion, Remiker testified that he searched Barb Janda's trailer and found this voicemail from Teresa Hallbach, which backed up her plans to arrive at the Avery property around 2 p.m. or a little later. This is front and center in the timeline, which directly supports the prosecution's claim that Avery was the last person to see Teresa Hallbach alive. So Remiker's actions were pretty much pivotal. I mean, his testimony is one of the sources for the state's key argument in trial that justified focusing exclusively on Avery right out of the gate. And, let's be real here. That single voicemail tipped the balance for law enforcement about where to zero in first or who to look at first. This wasn't a minor detail. This move that Remiker did had impact. Second, Remiker pops up in another instance in this post-conviction claim about police practices because there is a reference to a conversation between investigator Wiegert and Detective Remiker on November 5th after interviews with witnesses where they concluded that Hallbach's last appointment was actually at the Zipperer property and not at Avery's. And this is huge. And we haven't gotten to this yet don't be calling me out. We haven't gotten to this yet in the trial testimony. And the reason this is so big is because it goes against what the prosecution then hammered home at trial. The defense claims that investigators, including Remiker, concealed or destroyed evidence, like Hallbach's voicemail to the Zipperers, that showed that her last stop wasn't Avery's place. This is a big, wait a minute, what the hell, moment for anyone following the twists in this case. Did Remiker help prop up a selective timeline, or was he just part of the whole, chaos of this whole case? So to strip this down, Remiker was key in finding and testifying about the Janda trailer voicemail, and he was also involved in the sort of behind-the-scenes timeline building that defense attorneys argue was either manipulated or mishandled. This isn't just paperwork. It's about real questions of fairness and who gets the final word on actually what happened. So let's wrap up this actual episode that we just listened to, the final portion of Remiker's testimony. So George Zipperer first denied that he'd contacted Auto Trader And so did his son, Jason. But later, Joellen Zipperer set the record straight that Teresa Hallback had been out at the property to photograph a car sometime in this weird window between noon and 3 p.m. She was one of the very first witnesses on the stand. Was it precise time? No. But those denials, one right after the other, kind of makes you wonder just what they were worried about. What the hell is going on? So Stephen Avery, by comparison, is almost annoyingly cooperative. You've got George Zipper winning least cooperative neighbor, right? And then Steve Avery saying, hey, sure, come on in, look at through my whole place. I don't care. He chats. He says Teresa came over, photographed the car, and then left. Standard stuff. The next day, November 5th, law enforcement is out in force, responding to the unfolding case at Avery's salvage yard. It's still an active business. There's customers wandering around. Family members live on the site. But this is when things start to get hazy. When the car is found, it wasn't just about a missing person anymore. The vehicle was hidden. The plates had been removed. And at least for Remiker, suspicion snapped instantly from help us find Teresa to somebody's committing a crime here. So, then the search warrants go out and the rushing of the crime lab, bring the crime lab in. And if you're asking yourself why prosecutors suddenly get involved, you're not alone. Everybody in that room knew that this just escalated big time. So the evidence rolls out. The Toyota is recovered, but nobody's looked at it. Avery's house gets searched. Items were seized. Bedding was taken. These pieces of paper that have Teresa's cell phone number on it. Both of these could have been burned and destroyed. So why leave them out in the open unless someone wanted them to be found? It's the kind of detail that just doesn't add up. This does not make any sense. And then there's the garage. But not until it doesn't really come into play a whole hell of a lot until March of 2006. The family has still been there. They've come back a long time ago after the initial search was completed and then find this bullet casing underneath an air compressor. I mean, you could almost hear just the collective exhale of, oh, come on. Now you find it? And then there's the Janda's answering machine messages, right? 12 messages. Only one was pertinent to the case. Were they ever listened to before? No one knows. And Remiker tries to compare his own answering machine to that of what was in Barb Janda's home. And it just makes it more confusing than anything. So the state then comes back to why Avery was a person of interest. Just down to the basics. He was one of the last to see Teresa alive, which in any sane investigation, puts him squarely under the microscope. Yes. But again, he was one of the last to see Teresa alive. So this is where it lands, this ending of Remiker's testimony. The drama, the confusion, the misconnections, they're real. But so is this push to figure out what happened to Teresa. In the next episode, at the end of this day, which is day 8, they begin questioning Lieutenant Dan Kucharski. Again, he's with Calumet County. He was involved in several searches of the Avery yard, including Stephen Avery's trailer, and was present for the discovery of the key, the RAV4 key, on November 8th. His testimony then continues into day 9. So it's likely we'll go in the next episode from day to day, depending on how long the testimony is. But until then, I want to thank all of you for listening. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the brand new subscribers. And we'll be back soon with the next episode. Bye for now.